If you're over 65 and still driving the same way you have for years, 2026 could be the year you get fined, flagged, or even lose your license without ever realizing you broke a new rule. And here's the most dangerous part. Many of these new driving rules don't feel new at all. They look like the same roads, the same signs, the same habits you've trusted for decades. But underneath the surface, the system has changed, quietly, automatically, and in some cases, permanently. Starting February 2026, multiple U.S. states are rolling out enforcement rules that don't rely on warnings, discretion, or even direct police interaction. Cameras, algorithms, and insurance-linked databases are now doing the watching. That means you can be a careful driver, obey the speed limit most days, never touch your phone behind the wheel, and still end up paying hundreds or even thousands of dollars because of a single moment you didn't know was now illegal. This video isn't about panic, it's about awareness, because the drivers getting hit the hardest right now aren't reckless teenagers. They're experienced drivers who assumed the rules hadn't changed. Here's what makes 2026 different from every year before it. In the past, when driving laws changed, you usually heard about it. There were news stories, warning periods, grace phases. In 2026, the shift isn't really about new laws, it's about new enforcement. The rules you think you understand are now being interpreted more aggressively, enforced more precisely, and punished more expensively than ever before. And for seniors, that matters more than for any other age group because the consequences ripple further into insurance rates, license renewals, and even medical reviews. Across the country, states are under pressure to improve road safety, recover infrastructure funding, and reduce liability. Their solution has been automation. Automated enforcement doesn't care how long you've been driving. It doesn't care about your clean record. It doesn't issue warnings. It doesn't explain itself. It simply records, reports, and forwards the violation, often directly to your insurance company or DMV file. And once that happens, fixing the mistake is no longer simple. Many drivers assume that if something were truly serious, they'd be notified clearly. But in 2026, notification often comes after the damage is done. A ticket in the mail, a registration renewal suddenly denied, an insurance bill that quietly jumps 25%. For seniors living on fixed incomes, these aren't minor inconveniences. They're budget-breaking surprises. And what's worse is that some of the most impactful changes are not happening nationwide. They're happening state by state, county by county. What's perfectly legal where you live may trigger a citation the moment you cross a state line. This is where most people get caught. They rely on what's always been true. They rely on experience. But experience no longer protects you when enforcement is automated. Over the next part of this video, I'm going to walk you through the most important driving rule changes taking effect in 2026, with special attention to how they affect seniors age 65 and older. Not rumors, not speculation. These are enforcement policies already approved, funded, and in many cases already active. Some of them are genuinely about safety, others are about efficiency and revenue, but all of them share one thing in common. They punish drivers who aren't paying very close attention. And coming up next, we're starting with the change that is already catching more drivers than any other in early 2026. It doesn't involve speeding, it doesn't involve alcohol, and it doesn't require an accident. In fact, many drivers don't even realize they've done anything wrong until the ticket arrives. Hi, I'm Michael, and over the last several weeks, I've been digging through official DMV updates, state transportation notices, insurance bulletins, and legislative rollouts to understand what's really changing on U.S. roads in 2026, and more importantly, how those changes affect everyday drivers, especially seniors. I'm not here to scare you or overwhelm you with legal jargon. I'm here to translate what the system is doing right now in plain language so you can protect your license, your finances, and your independence. Because in 2026, the biggest risk isn't reckless driving. It's driving the way you always have, assuming the rules still work the same way. Let's start with the enforcement change that is spreading faster than almost anything else nationwide, and it's already catching tens of thousands of drivers off guard. Distracted driving is no longer being treated as a secondary issue. For years, many states followed what was called secondary enforcement. That meant an officer couldn't pull you over just for holding your phone. They needed another reason first. Maybe a broken tail light or rolling through a stop sign. That layer of protection is disappearing. As 2026 rolls in, more than a dozen additional states have officially moved to primary enforcement. And even states that already had hands-free laws are now enforcing them far more aggressively. What that means in real life is simple and uncomfortable. If an officer sees a phone in your hand or even sees the glow of a screen on your lap at night, that alone is now enough to justify a traffic stop. No speeding, no swerving, no warning. And in several states, enforcement guidance has expanded what counts as use. It's no longer just texting while driving. Holding your phone to check directions, scrolling a playlist while stopped at a red light, tapping a screen to dismiss a notification while traffic is paused. All of that can now qualify as distracted driving under updated definitions being enforced in 2026. This is where many experienced drivers get tripped up. For decades, stopping at a red light felt like a safe pause. You weren't moving, so you weren't really driving. But the law no longer sees it that way. If you're in the driver's seat, in control of the vehicle, and your phone is in your hand, you're considered actively operating the car, even if your foot is on the brake. That single assumption has changed the legal landscape, and the penalties are no longer symbolic. We're not talking about a small fine that you grumble about and move on from. First-time citations in many jurisdictions are now landing in the $200 to $500 range, and that's before court fees or administrative charges. But the ticket itself isn't the real problem. The real damage shows up quietly later when your insurance renews. For seniors, this hits harder. Many older drivers already pay higher premiums simply because of age-based risk models. A distracted driving mark on your record compounds that effect. And unlike some minor violations, distracted driving citations are rarely forgiven or removed early. Once it's on your record, it's there. What's especially frustrating is that many of these violations are completely preventable with very small changes. If your car doesn't have built-in Bluetooth or voice controls, this is the year to stop improvising. A simple dashboard or vent mount that keeps your phone out of your hands costs less than a single tank of gas. Most modern smartphones can make calls, read texts aloud, and provide turn-by-turn navigation without you touching the screen at all. It takes a little adjustment, but it's far cheaper than the alternative. This change is already active in many states, and more are joining every month, which means even if you haven't been ticketed yet, the odds are rising. And as uncomfortable as this sounds, distracted driving enforcement is only the beginning, because the next change doesn't involve police officers at all. And once it's in place, there's no discretion, no warning, and no conversation. If you think speed limits are enforced the same way they were 5 years ago, the next part is where things get serious. The next enforcement shift is one that many drivers assume doesn't apply to them until it does. Automated speed enforcement has existed for years, but in 2026 it's entering a completely different phase. This is no longer about a few fixed cameras near busy intersections. States are now rolling out AI-powered speed monitoring systems, especially in construction zones, and they are designed to operate with precision that leaves no room for error or explanation. In states like Michigan, these systems are already active in work zones across major highways. The cameras are paired with radar and timing software that measures your speed the moment you enter the zone and tracks it continuously as you pass through. If workers are present and you exceed the posted limit, even by a small margin, the system records your vehicle, your speed, and your license plate. There's no officer making a judgment call, no warning wave, no pulling you over on the shoulder. The citation arrives later, quietly, by mail. What makes this especially dangerous for experienced drivers is how these zones operate. The cameras are only active when workers are present, which sounds reasonable, but many drivers don't realize how narrowly that condition is defined. A single worker standing behind a barrier is enough to activate the system. Temporary signs may not look different from inactive zones you've driven through dozens of times before. And because many of these zones shift locations week to week, relying on memory is no longer reliable. The penalty structure is also designed to escalate. In some states, the first violation is issued as a warning, which gives drivers a false sense of security. The second offense often triggers a civil fine around $150. The third can jump to $300 or more. While some states currently classify these as non-moving violations without license points, others are already sharing the data directly with insurance companies. That means even if your license isn't affected, your premiums may be. For seniors, this creates a quiet financial risk. You may never interact with law enforcement, you may never step into a courtroom, but your insurance provider sees a pattern of speed-related enforcement and your rates adjust accordingly. And unlike traditional tickets, there's very little opportunity to contest these violations successfully. The system logs the speed. The speed exceeded the limit. The case is closed. The safest approach in 2026 is to treat every construction zone as absolute. If the sign says 45, you drive 45, not 50, not keeping up with traffic, not just passing through. These systems are calibrated for exact thresholds, and the margin that once existed has disappeared. School zone speed cameras are spreading rapidly across states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and others. These are not always obvious, and they don't operate the way traditional speed cameras do. Instead of being active all day, they're tied directly to school schedules. Typically, the cameras turn on 30 minutes before school starts and remain active until 30 minutes after the final bell. The same applies in the afternoon during dismissal. During those windows, speed limits often drop dramatically, sometimes to 15 or 20 miles per hour. If you exceed that reduced limit by as little as 10 miles per hour, the camera captures your plate and a citation is issued. No flashing lights, no immediate feedback. Many drivers don't realize they've been cited until the letter arrives days later. Fines vary, but first offenses often range from $50 to $250. That may not sound catastrophic, but just like with distracted driving, the secondary effects matter. Multiple citations in school zones raise red flags with insurers. And because these violations are camera-based, they accumulate faster than traditional stops. You don't get a warning conversation, you just get a record. There are practical ways to reduce your risk. Navigation apps like Google Maps and Waze are increasingly marking school zones and known camera locations based on user reports and municipal data. These alerts aren't a license to speed, they're reminders to heighten awareness. When you hear that alert, it's your cue to scan for signage, check your speed, and assume enforcement is active. Another important habit is time awareness. If you regularly drive through residential areas in the morning or afternoon, build a mental buffer into your routine. Assume school zones are active during typical start and dismissal times, even if you don't see children present. The system doesn't care whether kids are visible. It only cares whether the time window is open. Several states are moving toward a lower legal blood alcohol concentration, and the margin for error is shrinking to almost nothing. This change is modeled after what's known as the Utah approach. Years ago, Utah lowered its legal BAC limit from 0.08 to 0.05, and the results caught national attention. Fatal crashes involving drivers with alcohol in their system dropped significantly. Safety advocates praised the outcome, and now other states are following. Legislators in places like Washington, New York, and Hawaii are actively pushing similar reductions, and some jurisdictions are already enforcing stricter interpretations under existing laws. Here's why this matters so much, especially for older drivers. A BAC of 0.05 doesn't feel drunk to most people. It can be a beer with dinner, a glass of wine at a restaurant, 2 drinks over a couple of hours at a family gathering. Many drivers would have confidently driven home under those circumstances for years without issue. In 2026, that confidence can put you at serious legal risk. Alcohol affects people differently as they age. Metabolism slows, medications interact, body composition changes. A drink that once had minimal effect may now raise your BAC faster and keep it elevated longer. And the estimates people rely on, weight charts, drink counts, timing rules, are unreliable at best. 2 people can drink the same amount and end up with very different BAC readings. What makes this shift especially dangerous is that the penalties haven't softened just because the limit is lower. In states adopting or enforcing the 0.05 standard, the consequences look almost identical to traditional DUI penalties. We're talking about immediate license suspension, mandatory ignition interlock devices even for first-time offenders, fines that can range from $500 to $2,000, required alcohol education programs, possible jail time, and insurance premiums that skyrocket for years. The law treats crossing 0.05 the same way it once treated crossing 0.08. The safest rule in 2026 is also the simplest. If you plan to drink at all, don't drive. Arrange transportation before the first drink. Use rideshare services. Ask a family member. Stay the night. The cost of a ride home is always less than the cost of a DUI, both financially and personally. Now let's shift gears to a change that's hitting wallets in a different way, especially for drivers who thought they were getting ahead by switching to electric vehicles. For years, EV owners enjoyed lower operating costs, tax incentives, and the feeling that they were opting out of traditional fuel-based expenses. In 2026, that free ride is officially ending across most of the country. The reason is straightforward, even if it's frustrating. For nearly a century, roads in the United States have been funded primarily through gas taxes. Every time you filled up, part of what you paid went toward maintaining highways, bridges, and infrastructure. Electric vehicles don't use gas, which means EV drivers weren't contributing to that system, even though they used the same roads. As EV adoption increased, states started facing funding gaps. Their solution is new annual fees for electric vehicles. By January 2026, more than 40 states have implemented some form of EV road use fee. These aren't hypothetical, they're already showing up on registration renewal notices. The amounts vary, but many fall between $100 and $200 per year. Some states are using sliding scales tied to the vehicle's original price or age. Others are locking in fee increases that rise every year. In states like New Jersey, the fee increases automatically. In Pennsylvania, EV fees have already jumped significantly. For owners of newer or higher-end electric vehicles, the annual cost can approach $250 or more. When states explain these fees, they often point out that the average gas-powered driver pays even more in fuel taxes over the course of a year, and mathematically, that's often true. But for EV owners, this still feels like a surprise expense, especially for seniors on fixed incomes who budget carefully. What matters isn't the fairness debate. What matters is knowing the fee exists so it doesn't blindside you. And there's another layer to this that affects everyone, not just EV drivers. Several states are using 2026 as a testing ground for mileage-based road usage charges. Instead of taxing fuel, they're experimenting with taxing distance. The more you drive, the more you pay. These programs are still being piloted, but they signal a long-term shift away from gas taxes altogether. Some versions rely on self-reported mileage. Others use onboard devices or telematics. The idea is to charge drivers per mile, regardless of whether their car is electric or gas-powered. While these programs are currently optional or limited, the direction is clear. Distance-based taxation is coming, and once it's standardized, driving habits could directly affect annual costs in ways most people aren't used to tracking. The most important takeaway here is awareness. Check your registration renewal carefully. Read every line. Fees that didn't exist last year may now be mandatory. If you're considering buying an electric vehicle, factor these annual costs into your decision. And if your state offers mileage programs, understand how they work before enrolling. Ignoring them won't stop them from expanding. This next change is where the law stops being abstract and starts getting physical. In several states, 2026 marks a major expansion of what qualifies as reckless driving, and the consequences go far beyond a ticket. Law enforcement agencies are now being given broader authority to seize vehicles immediately if certain behaviors are observed, even if no one is injured and no accident occurs. What used to be written up as exhibition of speed or careless driving is now being classified as something much more serious. Actions like spinning tires, drifting in an empty parking lot, accelerating aggressively from a stop, or participating in informal street gatherings can now trigger on-the-spot vehicle impoundment. In some states, the officer doesn't need to prove racing. They only need to determine that the driving behavior was intentional and unsafe under the expanded definition. Here's what that means in real life. If an officer decides your actions fall under these updated reckless driving rules, your vehicle can be towed immediately and held for up to 30 days. There is no grace period, no fix-it option, no driving at home. You're standing on the side of the road while your car is taken away. For many drivers, the assumption is that this only affects young people chasing social media videos. That's not entirely true. Seniors can get caught up in these situations unintentionally. A sharp acceleration to merge into traffic, a brief loss of traction on a wet surface that looks intentional. Being present near a group of vehicles engaging in risky behavior. In some states, simply being associated with the scene can trigger penalties, even if you weren't the primary participant. The financial impact is severe. Towing fees can range from a few $100s. Storage fees often run between $50 and $100 per day. Over a 30-day impound period, that can add up to $1,500 to $3,000 before you even address the citation itself. Insurance consequences follow, and for repeat offenses, the penalties escalate quickly, including felony charges in some jurisdictions and multi-year license revocations. The message states are sending is very clear. Public roads are not playgrounds, and enforcement tolerance is gone. The safest move if you find yourself near a situation that looks questionable is to leave immediately. Don't linger, don't watch, don't film. Distance is protection. Because once your vehicle is tagged as part of the incident, the burden of undoing that decision falls on you, and it's a slow, expensive process. Now, after all that enforcement tightening, there is one area where the news is cautiously positive for older drivers, but it comes with conditions that can easily trip people up if they're not paying attention. States are reworking how senior drivers are evaluated. And while some long-standing requirements are being relaxed, others are becoming stricter and more procedural. For years, certain states required mandatory behind-the-wheel road tests starting at a relatively early senior age. That policy faced increasing criticism as data showed that older drivers as a group tend to be more cautious, less aggressive, and less likely to commit moving violations. In response, several states have raised the age at which mandatory road tests begin. In some cases, drivers may not be required to retest until their late 70s or even 80s. On the surface, this sounds like a win, and in many ways, it is. It reduces unnecessary stress and acknowledges the reality that age alone doesn't determine driving ability. But at the same time, states are tightening other aspects of the renewal process, especially vision and in-person verification requirements. In states like California and Florida, drivers over a certain age can no longer renew their licenses entirely online or by mail. They must appear in person at the DMV. The stated goal is safety. Officials want to assess vision, physical mobility, and alertness before issuing another multi-year license. They also want to confirm identity in person as part of broader fraud prevention efforts. This is where problems start for many seniors. In-person appointments are often limited. Scheduling delays are common, and missing a required appointment can have consequences far more severe than people expect. In many states, if your license expires because you fail to appear in person when required, it doesn't simply pause. It expires fully. And once expired under those circumstances, reinstating it may require starting the process over. Written tests, road tests, and full documentation. For seniors who depend on driving for independence, medical appointments, groceries, or caring for family, this can be devastating. And it's often preventable with one simple step: checking renewal notices carefully and early. If the notice says in-person appearance required, treat it as urgent. Don't assume it's optional. Don't wait until the last month. Book the appointment as soon as you're eligible. What's happening here reflects a broader reality. In 2026, driving privileges are being managed more actively across all age groups. The system is watching records more closely, verifying identities more frequently, and enforcing compliance more strictly. For seniors, that means preparation matters more than ever. One of the most overlooked changes arriving in 2026 has nothing to do with how you drive and everything to do with how your driver's license is treated as a legal identity document. For decades, renewing a license was mostly a routine task: a form, a fee, maybe a utility bill. That era is ending. States are now moving toward what they call a high-security identity framework, and it fundamentally changes how licenses are issued, renewed, and validated. What this means in practical terms is stricter documentation and tighter timelines. In several states, renewing a license now requires what officials consider gold standard proof of identity: birth certificates, verified social security numbers. For non-citizens, proof that directly ties license validity to visa status. If your visa expires in 6 months, your license may now expire in 6 months as well. No extensions, no grace period. The license is no longer treated as a general privilege. It's treated as a time-limited identity credential. For many drivers, especially those who have renewed online for years, this change comes as a shock. You may receive a renewal notice that looks familiar at first glance, but buried in the details is a line that says in-person verification required. Ignoring that line can quietly invalidate your license the moment it expires. You don't get a warning. You don't get an extra month. You simply go from valid to invalid overnight. At the same time, states are rolling out digital driver's licenses, often called mobile IDs. These live in secure smartphone wallets and can be scanned by law enforcement or airport security. They're encrypted, tamper-resistant, and in many cases, more secure than physical cards. For drivers who are comfortable with technology, they can be convenient. No fumbling for a wallet, no worries about loss or damage. But here's the part many people miss. Digital IDs do not eliminate the need for periodic in-person verification. In fact, some states are making in-person verification more frequent specifically because digital credentials exist. The goal is to prevent identity fraud, including AI-generated identities. That means even if you have a digital license on your phone, you may still be required to appear in person every few years to confirm that you are, in fact, a real human being. For seniors, this can be confusing. You may think that because you've renewed successfully online in the past, you can do so again, or you may assume that having a digital ID means you're fully covered. Neither assumption is safe in 2026. The rules now vary by state and by individual license type. The only reliable approach is to read renewal notices carefully and follow them exactly. If the notice says in person, treat it as mandatory. Skipping it can turn your valid license into an invalid one without any dramatic moment to alert you. Driving with an invalid license carries serious consequences, even if the expiration was accidental. Insurance may deny coverage, citations become more severe, and reinstatement can require starting the entire process over, including written and road tests. This isn't meant to punish drivers, but the effect is the same if you're caught unaware. Now let's move to a rule change that almost everyone thinks they already understand, but that has expanded in a way that's catching thousands of drivers off guard. Move-over laws have existed for years, and most people associate them with police cars and ambulances. If you see flashing lights on the shoulder, you move over or slow down. That made sense. In 2026, that rule has been broadened significantly under expanded move-over laws now active or taking effect in multiple states. The requirement no longer applies only to emergency vehicles. It now applies to any stationary vehicle displaying hazard lights. That includes tow trucks, maintenance vehicles, and yes, regular passenger cars stopped on the shoulder with their hazards blinking. This is a major shift. If you're traveling at highway speed in the lane closest to the shoulder and you pass a stopped vehicle with hazard lights without moving over or significantly reducing speed, you may now be committing a moving violation. In some states, fines have doubled or even quadrupled to reinforce compliance. Penalties can range from a few hundred to over $1,000, often with points added to your record. Why the severity? Roadside fatalities have reached alarming levels. Emergency responders, tow truck operators, and stranded motorists are struck and killed every year by passing traffic. The expanded law treats a family broken down on the side of the road with the same legal protection as a police officer. From a safety standpoint, it's a strong move. From a driver awareness standpoint, it's a trap for anyone operating on autopilot. For seniors, this requires a shift in scanning behavior. Flashing lights ahead are no longer something you register at the last second. They're an early warning. The moment you see hazards or emergency lights, you should be checking mirrors and planning a lane change. If you can safely move over, do it early. Signal clearly. If you can't move over safely, slow down significantly until you've passed the stopped vehicle. This isn't just about avoiding a ticket. It's about protecting people in vulnerable situations. That stopped car could be your spouse, your child, or you someday. And while enforcement is stricter, the intention is genuinely about safety. Still, many drivers will be cited simply because they didn't realize the rule had expanded. They assumed it only applied to police or ambulances. In 2026, that assumption is wrong. Hazard lights now carry legal weight, and ignoring them can cost you dearly. And as important as this change is, there's still one major shift left that affects families directly. It changes how new drivers earn full driving privileges and places much heavier responsibility on clean records, especially during the first year. If you have teenage children, grandchildren, or are helping a young driver navigate the system, the next part is critical. The final change affects families more than any other, and it marks a clear shift in how states now view the privilege of driving. For decades, getting a driver's license followed a familiar path. Study, test, pass, and progress naturally with time. In 2026, that path is being restructured nationwide. And while some steps appear easier on the surface, the overall system is far less forgiving. Especially during the first year a new driver is on the road. Many states are standardizing their approach to graduated driver licensing, inspired by models that have shown real reductions in fatal crashes. One of the most noticeable changes is the removal of a second road test in some states, which sounds like good news at first, but that requirement is being replaced with something much stricter, a clean record probation period that typically lasts 12 months. Nighttime driving is another major focus. Several states are pushing curfews earlier, moving them from 11 p.m. to 9 p.m. for newly licensed drivers. Passenger restrictions are also tightening. Many jurisdictions now prohibit any passengers under age 21, except immediate family members for the first 6 months to a year. The reasoning is backed by data. Each additional young passenger significantly increases crash risk, and per mile driven, fatal crash rates for teen drivers are dramatically higher at night. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Drive carefully, stay aware, and protect what matters.